Checking the mic, gonna check the mic, checkity check, check, check. All right, let's do it. All right, in this tutorial, I'm gonna walk kind of the newbie through my workflow. And so if you're getting started, you just got Lightroom, maybe you got Photoshop, and you're really not sure how to work with the two and how to organize and kind of just overall kind of a workflow is what it is. And so this is going to kind of walk you through what I do. Now, I'm not saying what I do is the best way, but hopefully this will kind of get your feet wet on what you can do with it and how you may want to organize things. I suggest you check out what other photographers are doing and their workflow. You kind of pick bits and pieces of what each people do, and you kind of create your own little workflow. A lot of them are kind of similar. We all kind of work in a kind of a similar way. But anyway, like I said, I'm going to cover importing images into Lightroom, doing a little bit of organizations, a little bit of editing, sending it out to Photoshop, doing a little few things there, and then bringing it back into Lightroom, and then finally bringing them back into, then finally exporting the images for different mediums. So for whether it's web or print or something like that. So that's it. I'm going to try to go as fast as I can through this, but I'm not going to get too deep. So just keep that in mind. So you may see me do something in Photoshop. You're like, oh, what was that? And I'll get into that in a later tutorial. I'll try to keep it simple and just kind of walk you through this little workflow, and this will get you kind of started working with your images. All right, let's begin. All right, when you first open up Lightroom, what you probably will notice is you're in the library module. How do you know that? Well, in this top, almost kind of right-hand corner of Lightroom, you'll see this little library. These are your different modules in here. So we're mostly going to be working in the library and the develop module. So if you're in the library module, and then go all the way over to your bottom left-hand corner, and you're going to click on import. Now there's a lot of ways you can import your images, meaning you can import them right from your camera. If you want to do that, it's fine. Or you can get a card reader and put the SD in the card reader and then import them off the card reader. You can even do this. If you have a card reader, you can copy those images into a folder on whatever hard drive that you're using, and then import them into Lightroom. So again, there's a lot of ways to do it. How I do it, I generally will import either from my camera or right from the card reader. And it may take a little bit of more time to do it that way, but it's fine with me. I just hit import and grab a cup of coffee, and by the time I'm done, it's usually it's finished. So what I have here is when I hit import, if you look over in this left-hand corner here, we have the sources. And since I have my SD card in that card reader, that's what's selected right here. And what we can see here is the images off this card. Now, some of them are grayed out, and the reason why is because over here on the right-hand side, we have don't import suspected duplicates. So I actually imported most of these images ahead of time, so it would take, so speed the process up a little bit. But just if none of these were grayed out, then that would be all the images, and I would be importing all new images. I like this feature. I always have that check marked right there. I also have build previews, one-to-one previews, and that's just to get better quality previews, and that helps speed up your editing and also viewing, because you get some nice good detailed in the images. Build smart previews, I don't check mark that, and the reason why is because I don't edit my images offline. So if you have to edit your images offline and you're not going to be taking your drive with your images and still need to get a decent resolution of those images and want to work on them, then you want to select the build smart previews. Since I don't work that way, I don't check mark that. The next thing, I'm not going to rename my files, even though it has check mark. I just have it as the as the camera settings for the numbering. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back in and rename it after import. So I don't worry too much about that. What I do worry about though is the keywords. So right here, I'm going to write in some keywords here for just general keywords. I'm not going to get too detailed because you don't want to write a keyword for, let's say, if for a very specific image, but if the other images are not related to that, it's going to put on all those images. So what I'm going to do is put very general keywords, and then afterwards I'm going to go back in and be a little bit more specific if I need to. So this was a photo shoot that I did it was a couple days ago. It was in Davenport. So I'm going to write in, so I already have some of these keywords already in there, so that's why it comes up nice and quick. And it was a sunset. Really nice place. If you're ever out in California, Davenport's a cool little spot to take pictures. Be careful, they got cliffs there. Whew. If you're afraid of heights, be careful. But all along that coast, from pretty much from Santa Cruz all the way up to Half Moon Bay, you can get there's some great spots to take pictures. All right, so I got my keywords in here. The next important part of importing is where we're going to put these images. So the way I have my images organized, and this is more for my personal images are just organized by a date. So I'm going to have the year, the month, and then the day. So if you go down to here, if you take a look down here, it says working drive. These are my folders here, date folders. So we're in 2014 and we're in February. And you can see here, since we can read the date off the images, it says it's going to drop in 12 images in this date right here. And the reason why it's setting up this way is because I have organized by date, and then I also have my date format. If I need to create some subfolders and things like that, I can check mark that, and then I can even name a folder if I wanted to do that. But this is my setting right here, and it's kind of just a simple setting, but it works great as far as organizing your images. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go up to the top here, and it says I want to select copy as DNG. So this is important. I think DNG is pretty much the standard right now for file formats. And what's nice about DNGs is they tend to be a little bit smaller, and you still have the raw image, so you're not like losing anything. And it also will pull in the metadata into the images without having a separate like sidecar file that goes with it. So it's contained all in one file, which is pretty cool. So I recommend using the DNG. It works pretty good. And it's like I said, it's a standard, so you can use it in a lot of different applications. So I'm going to go ahead and hit import. So I always double check, because sometimes I get a little anxious and I forget to check mark something. But yeah, everything's good. Got the previews built to 1.1 previews. Don't import duplicates. Everything's looking good. All right, so now we just got to hit import. And okay, I know why that's. Ignore that. So now it's going to import these images. So let's take a look at where this file is right here. So you can see them popping up right here. And what we're going to do next is we're going to slowly start to organize these images. And there's a lot of ways to organize your images in Lightroom. So like I said before, definitely check out what other people are doing, because they may have a method that resonates with you. But hopefully you'll be able to get some ideas from this tutorial. All right, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to actually, now you can do a couple things here. One of which is just starting to delete all the bad images you know you're never going to use. Or you can start or organize these into folders. So what I'm going to do first, I'm actually just going to go through and just look for some images that I just really never going to use. Wow, that's, I swear I was sober when I took these. Yeah, oh, that's a good one. Oh, even better. So I'm hitting X keystroke just to get rid of those, because I don't think I'll ever use those images. and I'm going kind of fast for demonstration purposes, and usually I go a little bit slower through these images. Okay, so if I hit the G key, it'll kind of show me a good little thumbnail preview of all this stuff. And now I have a few images that I know I'm not going to use anymore, or want to use. I'm not going to do anything with them. So what I do is I hit Command Delete, and that brings these images up, and it says delete these 7. I want to delete these from disk because I know I'm never going to use these again. So I'm going to go ahead and hit delete. And they send that out to the trash. They're going to see those images again, and that's fine with me. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these, and then I'm going to go over to this right-hand column here where the folder is located that I have highlighted there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on that, and I'm going to create a folder inside that. And this one's going to be called Leftovers. You're going to see why in a second. And it's just basically moving all of those images right into that folder. Almost finished there. There we go. Good. So now what I'm going to do is now I'm actually going to go through and actually select ones that I like. So I have a few down here that I like. I'll show you. I like this one. And let's see. I usually bracket my images because sometimes I want to do HDR. And if you select multiple images and hit P, that will pick those. It will select those. So that's how I go through these. Is I go and just hit the P key wherever I feel like an image that I really like. It's kind of like a first impression with these. And I may go back into my leftovers folder and find some ones that maybe I overlooked, but this is like a first pass. Anything that just pops out that I go, yes, I like it, I'm going to pick that. So the next thing I'm going to do, once I've picked a few images, I'm going to go into this filter here and select flagged, and that's going to bring up all the ones that I picked. So what I'm going to do now is select all, and I'm going to do basically the same thing again. I'm going to go over to my date over here, right click on that. I'm going to create a folder inside that date, if I can just do it right. These are going to be called my picks. And it's going to slam those in there. Look at that. If I select my picks folder, those are those images there. Now, what I may do is I could even distill these down by hitting the number key, which gives it a star rating. So that first one has a star rating of 1. And I generally kind of use the star rating based on how I really feel about the image, which makes sense. But so if it's an image that I just know it's killer and I'm gonna really do something with it, then I will give it a 5-star rating. So you can set these images by color, and if you use the keys of 6 or higher, it will give you, like 6 is going to be red there. If I do 7, we got yellow, green, and we got blue. So you can go ahead and do that, which is kind of nice. So nice way of maybe organize you in your images. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that one, these colors here. There we go. Now, very useful. So you have to kind of figure out what's going to work best for you. If it's rating them by the color is going to work for you, fine. That's a great way to do it. Let me show you one little cool little thing that sometimes gets overlooked. If you look down here, see this little spray can right here? What I can do is I can create a specific type of labeling or a keyword or whatever. What I like to do is I like to use keywords. So if I select that little spray can, hit keywords, and then I can enter a specific keyword. Let's say you shoot a wedding and you want to put the bride's name in that little area there, and then you can literally go in with the spray can and spray all the images where she appears. And it's like a quick way to kind of isolate and put a little more specific keywords to images. So if I wanted to maybe I wanted to add Santa Cruz to these images. So I have it in there. I just grab my spray can. I can literally just spray over those images. Now they are assigned those keywords, which is kind of cool. So I like that. That's a really useful little trick there. All right, so now I have to choose which one of these guys I'm going to work with. So let me take a look at some of these. All right, I like this one here. This has got a little promise here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the develop module. I'm going to hit lens correction. I'm going to make sure that that's selected. It's usually by default off, so just FYI on that. So I want to select that. And if you shoot with a wide aperture, like if you're shooting like 1.2 or 1.8, you want to make sure that you go into this color area and check your fringing, your chromatic aberration and your fringing. And I notice that a lot in shallow depth of field type images. And this is a great tool to reduce that. So that's something I'll do right from the beginning. Now, one of the first things that you want to think about is setting your white balance, and it's probably why it's at the top of the list here. You can do it using this little eyedropper here. Like if I select the ocean there, it's going to change my white balance based on the selection that I use right there. And a lot of times it works really good, but I may adjust it. Maybe I want a little cooler look to it, or maybe I'm just going to do my color adjustments later in Photoshop. So I just kind of get a general white balance here. If it has to be very specific for an image, then yeah, I use that little eyedropper and try to find a neutral gray section of the image, and that will create or change your white balance to the correct white balance. It actually works really well, but for me, for a lot of my creative stuff, I don't worry too much about it. I get kind of a ballpark. I kind of use my eye more than I use that eyedropper, but maybe that eyedropper is kind of a starting point for me. So I'm just going to slightly adjust that. And you can see I've already made a little bit of adjustments because I kind of worked on this image a little bit before. But so kind of adjust the highlights in the sky there, bring in a little bit more of that shadow detail there. And the cameras today just have so much great detail in just everything from the highlights to the shadows. You can really, it's almost like you don't need HDR anymore. I've been trying out this magic lantern that probably people have been talking about, and it's a software add-on to your Canon camera, and I tell you, it's awesome. If you like shooting HDR, it's a really cool tool, because normally in the Canon, like the older Canons, like the Mark II, the 5D Mark II, like what I got, you can only bracket 3 at a time. You can move the exposure over, but you have 3 that it'll shoot, and then you have to make adjustments. Now, the reason why I don't like that is because sometimes when you're making those adjustments on the camera, you can accidentally move the camera, shake it, and think the images don't seem to line up as well as they should, even if you have a sturdy tripod. What you can do with Magic Lantern is you can set it up for, let's say, if you want 5 exposure bracket. And here's the cool part. You can set mirror lockup, and it'll do it automatically. You just hit the shutter release button, and the mirror lockup it'll lock up, and it'll pause for a second and then fire off the image, and then the mirror will come up again and it'll pause for a second and fire off the next one, and it'll do all 5 images, and you can just sit back and sip your coffee or whatever. It's awesome. It's really cool. Check it out. The only problem is it voids your warranty. So hopefully your warranty is up on your camera, but read up on it. It is really cool. It has a bunch of other stuff on there, so definitely check it out. It's pretty easy to install. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go in here and clean up some of these images. And in Lightroom 5, they have this, I think it was introduced in Lightroom 5, but it has this little thing called Visualize Spots. And you can what's kind of cool about this is if I bring it up, see all these little, boy, I really need to clean my camera. See these little circle spots in there? That is like dust or something on my camera. So I can go in here and get rid of them. And without this little feature, it's hard to see it. And I just want to make sure, because what I've noticed sometimes, I'm going to try that one again. What I've noticed sometimes is I'll be working in Photoshop, and I feel like I got my edits the way I wanted to, and then I'll print it, and sometimes I miss these little things. So I'd like to go in here and fix a few of these. And there's one down here that I didn't like. All right, so now I take visualize off. See, looks great. Without that, it would be hard to see those. Oops, I see one more I need to get right here. There's also this little thing down here that I want to, it's part of the rock, I think. Oops. Let me do that one more time. Get this little guy here because I guess I have to take off of this. See this down the right-hand corner? That was the edge of the cliff there. So I'm going to may go with the clone stamp here. Just fix that. Nope. Didn't do it. I'll go with the heel. See what we do. Feather, opacity 100%. Let's see if that'll do it. It's not great. Sometimes if it's not working well, I just wait for Photoshop to do that. All right, so now I got my image kind of in a good starting point. So I've done my lens correction. Oh, there's one more thing I'm going to do actually. I'm actually going to line this image up. So if I show you this, if I reset this image, since I already did a little bit of work to it before. So you can see the horizon's not quite perfect. So if you select this angle tool right here, and you just kind of grab a point and then slide it off or stretch it over the horizon like this, it's going to straighten that out. Now, sometimes I don't know if it's me or if it's the program. Sometimes I don't feel like it works perfect. So sometimes I get it I have to eyeball it, but maybe it's probably user error. Let me just try it again. Oops, that was me that time. See, I had too much coffee. Your hand gets a little shaky. It's hard to set that thing. There we go. That looks a little bit better, a little straighter. All right. So now the one thing I would definitely want you to keep in mind is that was like the crop tool there. Don't crop the image. Even if I plan to do something like, I don't know, something like this with the image, wait until you've done all your edits with it. Cropping should be like the last thing you do, because you never know. You may crop it to where you like it, but maybe you want to do a banner thing for your website and you think this would be a cool thing. But if you've already cropped it, you may not be able to get that kind of crop for your website. So anyway, just remember, always crop at the end. I think it's a good thing. It's okay to kind of do a quick crop and then undo it if you want to see how it may look in the final version. All right, so I have everything. Now all these other little develop features here, I'm not going to get into. I'll get that into a different tutorial, but they do have some other little creative things that you can do into Lightroom. I am going to be doing most of that in Photoshop, so I'm just kind of, in a way, normalizing this image that I can edit later in Photoshop. All right, so let's do that. Let's get into Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click on this image and let's go over here to, if you can see this, edit in Adobe Photoshop, which is right there, which is great. I have all these other little plugins, whoops, which Butterfingers there, slipped off that, which sometimes I use. If I know, like I like to use Color Effects Pro 4. If you saw my favorite filters video, I love that. I love that program and that filter, and you can almost do all your editing right within Color Effects Pro. You can use what they call control points, and it's got tons of filters, tons of cool stuff. And a lot of times I will just spend all my time in Color Effects in Lightroom and not even go into Photoshop. But I do like Photoshop because it just works really well. But anyway, just FYI. So I'm going to hit that render using Lightroom. What it's going to do, it's going to take all those changes that I made in Lightroom and making sure that it carries over into Photoshop. And so it's creating a TIFF file for me, and then it's going to slam it over into Photoshop. It's thinking a little bit. It's going to boot up Photoshop. So even if you don't have it open, it's going to go, all right, we need to open Photoshop, and it's going to go ahead and do that, which is nice. And So I like this way of working. Again, what I did is I normalized my image, get it kind of a base starting point, and then I can do all more of my creative edits in Photoshop. And a lot of my filters that you saw in that list, I can also have access to in Photoshop. So if I want to add some of those things in Photoshop, I can do that, which is really cool. So that's why I usually kind of go right into Photoshop and do this. Now, if I had to edit a ton of images, I try to stay out of Photoshop because it just takes time to do all that. So if you're shooting weddings, or you're shooting anything that has a lot of images, you probably want to keep most of your editing in Lightroom. And what you can do is, if I go back into Lightroom, I'll show you another quick little trick. I don't want to get too deep in this, but if I'm let me go to the develop module, and if I do something, let's say oops. If I select, check this out. If I select multiple images, so this is the base. What we're seeing up here is the base, the main image that we're looking at. And if I select, let me do this one. So that's the one that we're viewing. And if I select these other ones, check out over here. It says auto sync. So what's great is whatever I do to this image, it's going to do it to these other images that I select. As long as auto sync is selected. Auto sync, I don't have to do anything. It'll just do it automatic. Where if I hit sync, I have to hit that button, and it'll ask me, what do you want to sync? Do you want to sync the crop? Do you want to sync the white balance? Do you want to sync the exposure? You can choose what you want. So if I'm going to do just general edits, let's say like lens correction, I'll go in here and select my lens correction, and it's going to do that to all those images there. Maybe I want a little what they call pre-sharpening. I have a preset over here for that. And so now that creates all these, or it syncs all those images to the same thing. You can see it's got the same sharpening. Let's check out the lens correction. Yep, see, lens correction is right there. Anyway, so that's a great way to kind of batch process a lot of images if you have to right into Photoshop. I'll cover some more of that in other tutorials, but I wanted to show you that. It's kind of a cool thing. All right, so let's check out this image in Photoshop. Let me close that. I like to kind of move my images kind of high in Photoshop so I can see it based on the height of my monitor. Now here's something that I like to do. It's real important to kind of zoom way out. And sometimes you will see things that you don't always see when you're looking at the image more on a full frame view. So I do kind of do that. What I notice is like any sort of hot spots or dark spots in the image will tend to stick out a little bit more. It also helps with seeing a vignette. Sometimes I put a vignette on an image and I think it looks fine, and then when I look at the image like this, it's like the vignette becomes really strong when you view it like this. So it's good to kind of check the image kind of zoomed out like that. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is hit Command J, and that duplicates that background. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to grab my curves adjustment. And again, this is not really a Photoshop tutorial. I'm just going to make a couple creative little edits with this. So what I'm doing is I'm just adding a little bit of red to the shadows and a little bit to the highlights like that. I'm going to play around with the blue curves and see what I can get out of the blue. Maybe add a little bit of yellow to that. Okay, looking good. I have this video softbox on here, so it's hard to see the screen. So hopefully that looks good on your end. Let's see. I normally don't edit with a softbox blaring at me. All right. So kind of, just make little adjustments. I may make a little contrast adjustment. Make it a little more dramatic. Gotta have a little dramatic feel to it. Now, you want to hear something crazy? Check this out. I'll show you. Now, there were some kids that were down here climbing over this part of the rock here, just literally against this area, and I don't know about you guys, but that would scare me, even though it's not that far. I mean, it's far enough, I guess is what I'm getting at. But here's the crazy part is when I shot this, it was probably about that dark. This was about 1.5 minute exposure. And like I said, it was about that dark. But here's the crazy part. These kids walked up from this side of the rocks here, this cliff here, and they walked up the edge of this. And on the other side of this edge, it's like a literally drop off like this. That's literally what it's like. If you don't believe me, I don't know if you can see it, but there they are. They literally walked right up there. I don't know about you guys, but that would freak me out. That is crazy. And it was dark. And it was one thing if it's light out, but it was literally almost pitch dark out there. If I was their parents, it'd be a whole different situation. So I'm just adding some more contrast in here with these curves. And what's the nice thing with these curves is I can adjust, I can blend these in. So for instance, this little tonal variation here, if I think it's a little too hot, I can pull down this opacity, and that brings back that effect a little bit. If I want to just paint that effect in, so let me give you an example of something. Sometimes I do this to dodge and burn. I'll show you. I'll grab another curves adjustment, and I'll crank it up a little bit like this, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my mask, which is that little white thing there, is selected. I'm going to hit Command-I, and that reverses it. It basically hides that effect. Now, if I hit the B keystroke, it gives me to my brush. And what I'm going to do now is, since that was a kind of a brightening effect, I'm going to go in here and just maybe lighten up a few areas here. Now, what I do have the opacity up. Here's my brush opacity, which is kind of how much it's going to paint in. You can see, and a lot of times I'll kind of go a little bit over the top because I can always back that off a little bit. Add a little bit of dodging on this. Something like this. Sometimes I don't go too perfect because then what I'll do is I'll just pull it down a little bit. And if you mess up, if you don't want to do that, just hit your X key, that goes to black, and you can paint that, basically start to cover up that effect again. If you don't have black and white in this area here, so maybe you have let's say something like this. So it's gray. So right, you see it's gray and black. What you want to do, if you want to get back to black and white, just hit your D keystroke. Boom, it goes back to black and white. X just reverses it, whichever one you want. So whatever's forward, that's what you're going to paint with. So right now it's set to white, and that will paint in this white kind of brightening effect there, that dodge effect there. All right, come on. Oh, Photoshop. All right, so that's kind of a cool way to kind of do a little dodge and burn. I'm not sure if I like this layer, so I'll get rid of it. Maybe I want to like darken the sky a little bit more. I can still use a curve, and here's what I may use, this little gradient. And I'll reverse that, Command-I, and then I can, whoops. And then what I can do is I can use this gradient tool. That was weird. Huh. Photoshop is acting a little funny. There we go. So there. So there's my little gradient like that. And the way I have my gradient tool set up is basically going from this white to zero opacity right here. And so that's what gives me that kind of effect right there. So that's one way of kind of, you can even make it, you can play with your curves a little bit more after. Whoops, let me make sure that I get that thing highlighted. And if you want to, if it's like didn't go far enough, just, that's all right. Just kind of do another one like that. You can do, keep going with that, keep adding that in. Basically it puts a nice little gradient in there. Smooth little gradient for the sky. There we go. If it's a little strong, it's okay. Bring off the opacity. All right. So now the last little, I would spend way more time on this. I'm just again, this is a little kind of a quick little overview. So I basically did some toning, did some contrast. I fixed some of the things. Oh, I know what I want to do. Speaking of fixing things, see this little thing down here? This is what I want to do, is I want to get rid of that. So there's a lot of ways to do it. Actually, let's do it. I'm going to do it with a spot healing brush. I was thinking of content aware, but maybe I'll do a video with content aware. Let's see if the spot, I don't know. I don't like that. Maybe I'll use the clone stamp. Sometimes you have to try them out and see what works. See what works best. Get a little bit bigger clone stamp. I just want to make it invisible. Sample all layers on flow. Okay, let me crank up the opacity here. Oh. Switch to normal. See how that looks. Good. All right, so that got rid of that. Clone stamp wins again. There we go. So we got the image. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to merge all that by hitting Shift, Option, Command, and E. And that pulls all that stuff I did onto the top layer. Now, sometimes if I know that I'm really finished with this image, I will do my sharpening here. And a lot of times I will resize my image first before I add the sharpening. If I want to have a good image on my website or something like that, the way to resize that, if you hit Option Command I, it brings up the image size dialog box. This is where you go in and can actually resize these images based on if you want a specific, like set up for inches, if you want it like right up here. Here would be you can go either pixels or percent. There's a lot of ways to resize that. So there is that school of thought of sharpening after you resize if you want the best possible quality with it. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I will sharpen it now. I'm not going to resize it, so just so you can get an idea of how I sharpen it. I like to use the Smart Sharpen. Out of all the, I have a couple plugins that do some sharpening, but I don't know. I still kind of like Smart Sharpen. It works. I feel like it works a little bit better than the sharpening tools in Lightroom. And what's nice is it gives you this 100% preview. You can also actually zoom into your image and look at the sharpening there. So, and by hitting the P, that basically gives you a preview of it. And what I'm looking for is just enough. I want to see the image take a little bit of shape. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so, and even if I feel like it's a little too much, I can still back it off with this opacity here. Or maybe you're doing a portrait. You can create a mask on this, like this. Command I, which gets rid of that sharpening effect. And if I have my foreground set to white over here, then I can hit the B key and then brush in that sharpening. So one thing that I don't like to sharpen is the bokeh part of the image, or the out of focus areas, and it just doesn't look right. So the parts that I want in focus, let's say if it's a portrait like the eyes, I don't really necessarily want to sharpen the skin that much, because that'll bring out probably too much texture and everything. If I do sharpen the skin, it's just subtle, very subtle, just to add a little bit of clarity. But most of the sharpening in a portrait is going to be on the eyes, maybe the hair, and things like that. So you can actually paint that in there, which is kind of cool. Since this is a landscape and everything needs to be relatively sharp, I'm just going to leave it like that. Now, I can go ahead now and just save the image, hit Command Save. And the nice thing with that is if I jump back into Lightroom, give it a second to do its saving thing. So here is the image. So here is the one that we spent in Lightroom, and this is what we did as far as the edits in Photoshop. So I'm just kind of looking at these subtle difference, see that? little darker, a little more dramatic. And then in Lightroom, you could still do some edits in Lightroom. So maybe you've done all your edits in Photoshop and you're like, I kind of need a couple more things. Maybe I want it to be a little darker, mid-tones or something like that. And maybe you want a little bit more color saturation out of it. Maybe you want a little more warmth to the image like that. You're like, so you can still make these little final edits to it. Now now that I've done pretty much everything I want with the image, this is where I will go in and resize it. Either resize or actually crop is what I want to do first. Now the resizing actually goes in the output part of it. So let's say I kind of set my crop up like this, and I got everything, I'm good to go, I'm ready to export this image by hitting Shift Command E. And it brings up the export dialog box. And so a couple things what we have here. At the very top, I have a very specific place that I'm going to be sending this image to. And that particular place is the kind of where I send my regular, just daily photographs and things that I'm going to be putting up on the web and Google Plus and things like that. If it's a print, I will have it sent to another folder specifically set up for a print. Maybe it's for a client, maybe it's for myself. So I can go in here and hit choose and set up a folder for that if I want to. So right now, I actually have this set for a preset, so I don't have to worry about selecting, doing anything in this area. So at first you will need to do that. Custom setting, this is where I just create the name. I could, if I do go back and actually rename the images, which actually, let me show you how to do that. So if we go into here, this is actually a cool little trick. Let me show you this real quick. And I think I was going to show you this before. So if I select my images here and I go into library and rename photos, I can actually set this up. Check it out. I can set this up for custom text and sequence. And that custom text is going to be whatever obviously I put in there. So right here I put Davenport, maybe I'll put Davenport Sunset. And starting number at 0, and if you remember, maybe I went too fast, but sequence, yeah, 001, that's usually where I like to kind of default to. Hit OK, and now all these images here in my pics folder, whoops, let me get if you hit Command I, that will shuffle through the different parameters for these images. So you can see Davenport Sunset, and it's got the different days set up, or not different days, the different numbers, sequential numbers for this. So there we go. So hit G, zooms back out. Let me go now export that, go back to that export dialog box by hitting Shift Command E. Like I said, got the folder set up. Now I got my custom text. If I want to change that again, I could just set it up for the file name. But what I like to do is I generally will change it based on kind of the jobs I'm doing. So let's say if it's for a client, I can either, if I remember to do all these correctly, meaning rename them, then I don't need to, I can set up my custom settings for the actual file name. But if I get a little lazy, I can still change the name based on this, and it will actually, even if you have multiple ones selected, so let's say if I have 5 images selected and I just set it up as Davenport Sunset, it will tag on that 001, that kind of numbering sequence, which is kind of cool. You almost don't need to rename it sometimes, but I like to still do that for my own organization purposes. All right, so for now I'll do it 001 or 01, and that's the version. And here we have a couple things. We have resize. This is how I'm going to resize my image. I always use long edge because I usually will do the cropping and dimensions in the crop tool in Lightroom, and then I just have to set where I want the long edge. So if you're doing an 8x10, you can set that crop tool for 8x10, crop your image, and make sure that you go in here, the long edge is set to 8 inches. 10 inches if you're doing 8x10, that kind of thing. So since this is going on the web, I'm going to go with a 1600 pixels on the long edge resolution. I don't have to worry about that just yet because I'm not doing print. It is an important thing to learn about, but for right now, I'm just gonna leave it at 300. Sharpen for screen, I generally always go low because I've already added some sharpening to this. Sometimes I don't even use the sharpening. include all metadata. I like to do that. Watermark, if you like that little watermark, that's a little area there. You can set up your own custom little watermarks in there by hitting edit watermarks. So there you go. Now that's about it. All we have to do now is click on export, and see I already have one in there. So it's going to ask me, do you want to overwrite, or do you want to basically rename it? And what it's going to do is just going to do that sequential numbering for me. So there you go. That's the end of this tutorial. Hopefully, I know it was probably kind of long, but if you're new and wanting to get your feet wet with working with Lightroom and Photoshop, hopefully that kind of helped you a little bit. So, all right, guys and gals, I'll see you in the next video.